There are moments in life when someone walks away and it feels as if everything inside us begins to collapse. That person who used to reply to our messages, who looked at us with tenderness, who made us feel seen and valued. Suddenly, they're gone, and we're left standing there, caught in a silent storm of questions. What did I do wrong? Where did I fail? Why wasn't I enough? This scene, though deeply personal, is far more common than we might think, but it is rarely understood in its full emotional depth. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychoanalyst, saw these breaking points not as punishments, but as pivotal moments. Portals, in fact. To him, rejection, painful as it is not just an emotional wound. It's a symbolic experience, pointing us towards something much greater. The opportunity to confront who we truly are, beyond the relationships we think we need to define us. Jung taught that the psyche finds balance in polarities, light and shadow, acceptance and rejection, consciousness and the unconscious. This wasn't a moral split between right and wrong, but a profound vision of the human soul, urging us to look at the totality of our being. He didn't frame life as a battlefield between good and evil, but as a sacred dance between opposites that are seeking to reconcile in a wider, deeper, more conscious center. The shadow, the parts of ourselves we prefer to ignore, is not something to be destroyed, but something that longs to be acknowledged and embraced. What we deny in ourselves doesn't simply vanish. It hides, it wears a mask, and eventually it shows up again, through our relationships, our desires, and most of all, our wounds. Every painful event, especially rejection, is a symbolic manifestation of something within us, crying out to be integrated. It's not by chance that the moments which hurt the most are the ones that brush up against our deepest insecurities. It's not random that the people who affect us most stir up old emotions we thought we had long since buried. Life, in its archetypal wisdom, uses these moments not to punish us, but to push us inward, to the uncharted regions of our psyche that we have yet to claim as our own. Rejection is not the universe handing us a verdict that we are not enough. More often, it is a signal, a message that there are parts of ourselves we have abandoned or forgotten. Perhaps we projected our worth onto someone else, hoping they would validate us from the outside. Maybe we ignored our authentic needs out of fear of losing connection. Or perhaps we built our entire identity on shaky ground, shaped by other people's expectations and wounds we never dared to heal. But when rejection enters the picture, those structures begin to crack. And it is through those cracks that consciousness can finally seep in. Rather than treating our pain like an error that needs a quick fix, Jung invites us to explore the deeper symbolism of the experience. He urges us to ask, what part of me is being called to the surface? Is it my self-worth that needs to be rebuilt from within? Is it my authenticity begging to rise again after years of trying to please others? Is it the inner child, the most innocent, raw part of me, that's longing to be loved unconditionally? Each rejection carries a hidden message. Each emotion it stirs is a voice from the soul. Being rejected does not mean we are being denied by the universe. More often, it means we are being gently, sometimes forcefully, pushed toward a fundamental part of ourselves that we have yet to meet. It's a call to stop searching for answers outside and to begin looking inward, with honesty, with courage. And it's in this radical act of facing what hurts without judgment that real transformation begins. The true inner alchemy starts here, when we integrate what was once in shadow and allow a fuller, more authentic, more liberated version of ourselves to emerge. The ego, fragile as it is, yearns to be loved. It craves to be seen, validated, recognized by others. It builds itself from mirrors, what others think of us, what we manage to portray, what we believe will make us worthy of love. But that's a survival mechanism. It's a way to protect ourselves from the terrifying vastness of the inner void. And yet, if we dare to walk through that void, if we dare to lose what we thought defined us, we might just find something far greater waiting on the other side. Our own truth, no longer dependent on someone else's gaze, but anchored in who we truly are. As Jung wisely warned, the ego is not the center of the psyche's totality, but merely a small fraction of it. Beneath the ego lies the soul, a deeper, unconscious, and profoundly wise dimension. The soul does not crave admiration. It longs for wholeness. It's not interested in fleeting approval, in applause or praise that fades with time. What it seeks is the kind of truth that cannot be compromised or negotiated. This is why, when rejection strikes and the ego begins to fracture, something ancient and sacred within us awakens. The soul stirs, and suddenly, rejection is no longer just an emotional wound. It becomes a threshold, a mysterious gateway that invites us to descend from the surface identity we show the world into the hidden depths of our true being. It is in those painful moments, when everything external begins to collapse, that our gaze can finally turn inward, not as an act of isolation or escape, but as a path to redemption, a return to self. Because beneath the desperate need to be liked lies an even deeper longing to be real, not perfect, not accepted, not celebrated, just real. And instead of chasing someone else's validation to cover up our pain, Jung invites us to ask different questions, the kind that expand our awareness. These are not questions that offer quick or easy answers, but questions that plant the seeds of transformation. What part of me has been wounded? Could it be the inner child who still feels he's not enough? Perhaps it's the carefully crafted image I've worked so hard to build, the one designed to make me likable. Maybe it's the yearning for belonging, which once again was met with a closed door. To recognize which part of us has been hurt is not a weakness, it is clarity. It is the first honest step in a healing process that can only begin in truth. What image of myself is now falling apart? Is it possible that the pain of rejection isn't just about what I've lost externally, but about what has crumbled internally? Maybe I believed that if I was good enough, if I was perfect, if I adapted to others' needs, I wouldn't be abandoned. Maybe I created an ideal self, a false version of who I thought I needed to be. And now, in the face of pain, that illusion is showing its cracks. But this collapse is not only necessary, it is sacred. Because only when the illusion of who we think we are dies, can the truth of who we really are begin to emerge. And within that process comes a crucial question. What part of me have I been sacrificing for the sake of fitting in? What quality within me am I no longer willing to betray just to be accepted? Here lies the hidden gift of rejection. Deep inside the wound, there's a force yearning to be born, a truth that no longer wants to be silenced for the sake of love, a sense of worth that refuses to be tied to others' approval. This kind of realization doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, gradually, but when it does, it liberates. We begin to reclaim ourselves. We become whole, not because the world suddenly accepts us, but because we stop giving ourselves away in fragments. Rejection, then, ceases to be the end of a story. It becomes the beginning of a homecoming. a return to that inner home where we no longer beg for a place to belong because we've remembered something essential, our innate right to exist with dignity. Becoming someone others don't want to lose is not about seduction, manipulation, or emotional tactics. It's not about refining an image or polishing ourselves into something more desirable. It's not about collecting charming gestures or learning how to please others better. The real work, the deep, sacred work, is becoming someone we ourselves don't want to lose. And that journey begins the moment we stop running from rejection and start listening to what it's trying to show us. In Carl Jung's vision, much of what we do to be noticed, desired, or validated is nothing more than a superficial game played by the ego. The ego is endlessly chasing applause, clinging to recognition, desperate to be someone in the eyes of others. But the soul doesn't care for any of that. The soul longs for something much deeper. It yearns for wholeness, not approval. And that's why the real journey isn't about making others love us more, but about learning how to never abandon ourselves again. True transformation begins not when others finally see our worth, but when we decide to stop begging to be seen. Becoming truly unforgettable has nothing to do with the desire to be needed. It's born from the courage to become indispensable to oneself, to choose a life that isn't built on the fear of abandonment, but on the fullness that arises when we truly inhabit ourselves. This kind of evolution doesn't take place in the surface-level dynamics of relationships, nor in the fleeting reactions of the world. It unfolds in the deep, sacred silence of the soul, in that inner territory where one begins to reconstruct oneself from the roots, not in order to please, not to fit into an external mold or satisfy an inherited ideal, but to be true, to become who one really is. When someone achieves this, when they build themselves upon the foundation of inner solidity rather than on the shaky need for approval, something shifts. Even the way the world perceives them changes. That person is no longer seen as someone waiting to be completed. They are seen as someone who has already found themselves. And that is what draws others in, not with an urge to possess, but with the impossibility of ignoring something so real. Those who become irreplaceable don't do so because they meet everyone's expectations. They become irreplaceable because they have descended into the depths of their own being and returned with a fire that only authenticity can ignite. It's visible in their eyes, in the way they walk, in the serene strength they carry, unafraid to be alone. There is something profoundly magnetic about a person who has transformed their wound into alchemy and their solitude into creative power. Someone who has known rejection, yet chooses not to hide behind pride, not to self-blame or beg for love, but instead chooses to be reborn, activates an energy that words can hardly express. It's not an act, it's not performance, it's a presence, a glow, a peace that doesn't depend on recognition, because it arises from a conscious and radical self-love. That magnetism isn't a tactic, it's not a trait they've trained. It's the visible expression of a soul that no longer denies itself. It's the vibration of someone who has walked through pain and emerged not hardened, but more human, more tender, more free. Only when one dares not to flee from oneself does that unmistakable light emerge, the kind of light no one wants to lose, the light of someone who has learned to love themselves without conditions. In this world, where so many are seeking validation, where social media rewards appearances and society feeds an endless hunger for approval, the person who validates themselves becomes something deeply rare, almost sacred. Jung already sensed this. The more we search outside for what is missing inside, the further we move away from our own wholeness. The soul doesn't want popularity. It wants completion. It doesn't seek praise. It seeks meaning. That's why the person who stands from their own center, who doesn't ask for permission to exist, begins to radiate a vibration that transcends appearances. The person who no longer needs to belong in order to feel complete is no longer at the mercy of emotional tides. They stop trading their values for acceptance. They no longer shrink to avoid discomfort. They don't swell with praise, and they don't collapse with neglect. They have found within themselves a source that doesn't dry up from rejection, nor overflow from external attention. That kind of inner stability is a miracle in our time, because in a world hypersensitive to the gaze of others, being free from judgment is revolutionary. There is something profoundly powerful, even if quiet, about someone who has made peace with themselves. They don't need to speak much, or persuade, or use strategies to attract. Their very presence brings calm, not because they're perfect, but because they've stopped being at war with themselves. And that peace, that serenity, that doesn't rely on outside conditions, is perhaps the rarest and most precious thing today. In the vibration of someone who has become whole, there is something unmistakable, even if unnamed: integrity, truth, authenticity. From a Jungian perspective, becoming someone unforgettable is not an external achievement. It's the result of an inner process, the process of individuation. It's not about social success. It's a transformation of the soul. It means facing your own shadows with courage. It means making peace with your contradictions. It means integrating the exiled parts of yourself. Only someone who has gone through this inner alchemy, who has accepted their wounds, their darkness, their story, can radiate a light that doesn't blind but guides. Because this transformation is alchemy. The ability to transmute the lead of rejection, that heavy, painful, paralyzing feeling, into the gold of self-knowledge. It's not about revenge. It's not about pride. It's about evolution, about walking through the fire of abandonment and coming out the other side more awake, more lucid, more alive. It is a journey towards psychic freedom, where one stops living to be chosen and begins to live to be true. And when that happens, everything else follows. Because authenticity isn't something you chase, it's something you find. And when someone embodies it, they inevitably become unforgettable. Not because they tried to, but because truth has that kind of power. Real power, the kind that doesn't need to shout or conquer, is born the moment we stop trying to prove ourselves. When we let go of the compulsion to be seen, to be liked, to be validated. That's when the soul finally breathes. And that's when others feel something in our presence that cannot be explained, only felt. Carl Jung might have described it as the pivotal moment when the conscious self stops identifying with the masks of the ego and begins to align with the self, the deepest, most authentic essence of being. It is in that precise moment that self-love no longer depends on the applause of others, and the sense of self-worth is no longer defined by the presence or permanence of someone else in our lives. Inner security no longer fluctuates with comings and goings. It becomes rooted, sacred, unshakable. When this transformation takes place, the human being stops being merely a personality, a projection, or a social strategy to belong. Instead, they become presence, essence. They no longer need to prove anything, to impose themselves, to explain, or to insist. There is something in the way they move through the world that leaves a mark, even in silence. They don't cling, they don't beg, they don't plead to stay. But for those who find them, letting go becomes profoundly difficult. Their energy offers peace, their truth is tangible, and their authenticity, in a world suffocating in masks, becomes a quiet revolution. We live in times where falseness multiplies rapidly. Relationships exhaust themselves in fear, and most people are trying to become something for someone else before learning to be something for themselves. In such a context, authenticity becomes a radical act of courage. The one who chooses not to dress to be liked, not to speak to be accepted, not to act from fear of being alone, begins to shine with a light that was never intended to illuminate. And yet, it illuminates. That light is the reflection of a soul that no longer begs for love, because it has found itself amid the noise and chaos. And most importantly, the person who becomes what no one wants to lose does not do so to be desired. They don't do it to be the center of attention. They don't do it to prove they're worthy of being chosen. They do it because they've chosen wholeness as their way of life, because they've understood that they don't need to be chosen by anyone else if they haven't first chosen themselves. That's when everything begins to shift. The frequency with which one walks through life changes entirely. Decisions are no longer born out of fear of being left, but from the desire to create, to express, to live from fullness. The heart no longer begs for love, because it already carries it within. The mind no longer fabricates stories to justify someone else's departure. And all the energy that was once invested in waiting, longing, hoping is redirected toward expansion, toward authenticity, toward the conscious creation of a unique and self-defined path. That is the new kind of power. Not the power that dominates or forces, but the one that radiates. Not the power that seeks to control, but the one that trusts. A silent, unstoppable force. Because the one who has learned to stay with themselves no longer fears losing anyone. And paradoxically, that is the person no one wants to lose. Rejection stops being a wound and becomes a sacred invitation to awaken. Carl Jung taught us that every shadow reveals a truth, and every loss pushes us toward deeper integration of the self. Becoming the kind of person no one wants to lose is not about external conquest. It is an internal reconciliation. It is the decision to choose authenticity over approval, fulfillment over dependence, and truth over performance. In a world oversaturated with appearances, the person who validates themselves from within shines with a power that cannot be imitated. They do not seek to stay in anyone's life. They stay in their own. And from that place of self-love, of presence, of depth, they transform everything. They turn energy into magnetism, pain into power, and solitude into absolute freedom. Because the soul does not want to please. It wants to be whole, and whoever becomes whole becomes unforgettable. So remember, when you choose to be yourself in a world that constantly invites you to pretend, you become a beacon of authenticity, a soul that shines effortlessly. You are not here to beg for love, you are here to be love. You didn't come to fit in, you came to awaken. And when you choose yourself above all else, the entire universe begins to rearrange itself in your favor. If this reflection resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to continue exploring together the profound wisdom of Carl Jung and the transformative power of the inner self. Activate the bell so you don't miss any content that nourishes your soul, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that wholeness begins from within. See you on the next journey to to the depths of you.
Have you ever wondered how others truly perceive you? Not based on the image you try to project, nor on what you say or do, but on something deeper, the energy you radiate without even realizing it. Imagine for a moment that the way the world sees you isn't shaped by your words or actions, but by something far more profound, the unspoken essence that emanates from within you. We live in a society where many people settle for merely existing, for blending in, for following a script they never wrote. But deep down, you know that wasn't meant to be your path. There's something within you that whispers, you weren't born to be just another person in the crowd. You were meant to be something extraordinary, something one of a kind. The question is, how do you become that? Carl Jung spoke about individuation, the process of discovering and fully embracing your most authentic self. It's not about crafting a false version of yourself to impress others. It's about peeling away the layers that have kept you from seeing who you truly are. It's about looking inward and acknowledging the parts of yourself you've ignored, the shadows you've been afraid to confront. From childhood, we are taught to fit in, to conform to external expectations. We grow up believing that acceptance depends on playing certain roles and following certain rules. But in doing so, we lose sight of the most important thing, our own essence. Jung described this as being trapped behind masks, personas we adopt to navigate society. Over time, we forget that beyond those masks, something far more real exists. Picture a seed inside you, pure potential, untouched by fear or doubt. But that seed will only grow if you choose to nurture it. This means facing what's within you, your fears, your insecurities, the limiting beliefs you've carried for years. Every time you felt inadequate, every time you've doubted your worth, it has been a signal, your true self calling to be seen. Jung spoke of the unconscious self, the hidden part of us that silently influences our choices, our fears, and our insecurities. Many people go through life disconnected from themselves, searching outside for the validation, love, and recognition they already carry within. But what if the key isn't to seek more? What if the answer has always been inside you? When you start exploring who you really are, you uncover strengths you once overlooked and traits you once saw as flaws, but are actually the essence of your uniqueness. The goal is not to change who you are, but to expand, to shed the layers that have kept you small, and to recognize your inherent worth. Think of a raw diamond. At first glance, it seems like just a rough stone, but to those who can see beyond the surface, its potential is undeniable. With the right effort, that diamond can shine in a way no other can. You are that diamond, and though the process of refining yourself may be uncomfortable, even painful, it is the only way to reveal the brilliance that has always been within you. No one else can do this work for you. The choice is yours. Will you remain just another option, or will you become irreplaceable? Being authentic does not mean being distant or arrogant. It means being so true to yourself that others cannot help but recognize your uniqueness. It means having such deep self-awareness that you no longer seek external validation to confirm your worth. Jung said that the greatest act of courage is to face oneself, to confront the shadows that frighten us. Because in those very shadows lie the obstacles that keep us from seeing our own light. Every time you felt like you weren't enough, every time you have doubted your own value, it wasn't your own voice speaking. It was the echoes of society, family, or past experiences conditioning your mind. And as long as those voices control your life, you will remain just another option. Because the truth is, others will value you only as much as you value yourself. What does it truly mean to value yourself? It's not about empty motivational phrases or self-deception. It goes much deeper than that. It's about looking at both your successes and failures with the same level of acceptance. It's about embracing your strengths while also acknowledging your weaknesses. Every experience you've had, no matter how painful or seemingly insignificant, serves a purpose in your personal growth. Society teaches us that to stand out, we must compete, outshine others, and always strive to be the best. But that mindset only leads to exhaustion. True greatness doesn't compete. It simply exists. Think of a tree in the forest. It doesn't strive to be taller than the others. It just grows to its fullest potential, and in doing so, it becomes remarkable. The same applies to you. Your purpose isn't to compete. It's to evolve into the most authentic version of yourself. And when you start living from that truth, everything shifts. Your presence carries a different energy, and you no longer need to prove your worth. Your very essence speaks for itself. The path to authenticity isn't easy, but it's the only journey worth taking. And in the next section, we'll explore how to begin this transformation, facing your fears and embracing who you truly are. The world doesn't need more imitations. It needs the realest version of you. Authenticity is both one of life's greatest challenges and one of its most powerful strengths. It's not about fitting into pre-made molds, but about recognizing your true essence and living from it. Carl Jung referred to this as the process of individuation, an internal journey where one must confront their shadows, integrate their true self, and rise above external influences to become whole and complete. But this journey isn't simple. It demands stripping away the masks imposed by society and facing one's fears with courage. When someone embraces their authenticity, they become irreplaceable, not because they achieve more than others, but because they radiate a unique energy that is impossible to replicate. But this doesn't happen overnight, nor is it a superficial process. Authenticity is a result of deep inner work, learning to hear your own voice amidst the noise of the world. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, explained that those who find an inner purpose can endure even the harshest circumstances. Their energy is not scattered in seeking external validation, but concentrated into a solid core that radiates confidence and determination. Think about the people you truly admire. They aren't the ones who blindly follow trends. They are the ones whose authenticity makes them shine from within. Nietzsche spoke of the importance of becoming who you truly are, a task that requires courage, as it means shedding external influences that have shaped your identity since childhood. How many times have you felt pressure to conform to others' expectations? How often have you silenced your true voice for fear of rejection? The energy we project doesn't come from superficial actions. It stems from what we genuinely carry inside. Jung believed that the human psyche is made up of different archetypes, and our task is to integrate the hidden parts of ourselves to achieve balance. The shadow, for instance, represents the aspects of our personality that we suppress because they don't align with the image we want to present to the world. But ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It only pushes it into the unconscious, where it continues to influence our decisions and the energy we radiate. A clear example of this is when someone projects confidence on the outside, but internally struggles with deep doubts and insecurities. No matter how much they try to appear strong, their energy will always reveal the truth. Authenticity, however, does not mean the absence of fear. It is the ability to face it without denial. A person who embraces their vulnerability and actively works on personal growth radiates genuine strength, because their energy is not fragmented by self-deception. If you want to transform your energy, you must start by looking within. Ask yourself, how many times have you let fear dictate your choices? How often have you dimmed your own light just to fit into an environment that fails to appreciate your true self? The energy of a person who carries themselves with presence is not rooted in arrogance, but in a quiet confidence that comes from deep self-awareness. It is the unshakable understanding that you do not need to compete with anyone, because you're already enough as you are. Imagine a lake at the peak of a mountain. Its surface is calm, perfectly reflecting the sky. This represents aligned energy, someone who has cultivated inner peace that does not require external validation. Now, picture a lake disturbed by a storm, its waters murky and restless. This is the energy of a person consumed by internal chaos, caught in the grip of external expectations and unresolved inner conflicts. The contrast between these two images lies in the inner work each individual has chosen to undertake. Yet, the world we live in does not make this process easy. Social media, career pressures, and family expectations push us to seek validation from others instead of building a true connection with ourselves. We are conditioned to measure our worth by external achievements rather than by the peace we cultivate within. However, the more we disconnect from our essence in an attempt to satisfy the outside world, the more we weaken our energy. Jung believed that the collective unconscious shapes our perception of reality. But true growth happens when we learn to separate our own voice from that of society. To do this, we must develop what he called the self, a fully integrated psyche where we embrace both our light and our shadow. Only when we stop battling against ourselves can we project an energy that is truly powerful and authentic. If you have ever felt the need to do more, be more, or prove yourself to others, pause for a moment and reflect. True abundance is not something you acquire from the outside. It is something cultivated from within. The Eastern philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "When you realize nothing is lacking, the whole world belongs to you." This phrase captures the essence of internal transformation, the understanding that you are already complete without needing external validation. Imagine yourself as a river flowing effortlessly. The water does not try to control its course. It simply moves forward, knowing it will reach its destination. When we force things, cling to control, or chase approval, we block that natural flow. We fill ourselves with tension, unnecessary worries, and fears that only drain our energy. But when we trust in our authenticity and allow our essence to be expressed freely, everything begins to unfold with greater ease. How do you begin this journey of transformation? There's no secret formula, no instant switch. But there are practices that can help you strengthen your energy and align with your true self. Meditation is a powerful tool because it allows you to observe your thoughts without becoming trapped by them. Self-reflection, whether through journaling or therapy, helps uncover the fears and external expectations that have shaped your choices. And above all, embracing authenticity, making decisions that truly represent who you are, even when it means standing alone. The world is filled with people who settle for the ordinary, who follow the rules without question, who skim the surface of life without ever exploring the depths of their own being. But you are not just another option in a world overflowing with superficiality. You have the power to be someone whose energy inspires, whose presence transforms, whose authenticity reflects a deep and ongoing inner evolution. Real transformation does not happen within the confines of comfort, but in the willingness to look within with honesty and commit to personal growth. When you dedicate yourself to this path, you realize that you don't need to speak louder or seek attention to be noticed. The presence of someone who has found their inner center is felt before they even utter a word. And when that happens, you stop being just another face in the crowd. You become someone impossible to ignore. True abundance isn't about accumulating more. It's about shifting your perception to recognize that you already have everything you need to feel whole. It's a transformation in how you experience life, in how you value what surrounds you, and most importantly, in how you see yourself. People who radiate confidence and peace are not chasing external validation. They have found within themselves the source of their well-being. When we operate from a place of lack, we experience an insatiable emptiness that no achievement, recognition, or external love can ever fill. Seeking fulfillment from a place of need keeps us trapped in a cycle of endless dissatisfaction, where nothing is ever enough. But when we develop a healthy relationship with ourselves and trust in our intrinsic worth, we stop depending on outside factors to feel complete. Jung believed that many of our relationships are shaped by unconscious projections. For example, someone who constantly finds themselves surrounded by people who disregard their boundaries may, on some level, believe they don't deserve respect. But as self-worth is cultivated, these projections begin to fade and relationships naturally shift. In other words, by healing internally, we reshape the external world around us. History is filled with individuals who chose authenticity over conformity and left an undeniable mark on the world. Teresa of Avila defied the societal norms of her time, prioritizing spiritual connection over expectations. Gandhi recognized that true social change could only arise from inner transformation. These examples remind us that when someone chooses themselves with courage, they don't just improve their own life. They create a ripple effect that reshapes the world. Self-love is not a final destination, but a daily practice. Strengthening it involves setting firm boundaries. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Learning to say no is an act of self-respect. It also means challenging limiting beliefs. Many insecurities stem from societal expectations or past experiences. Reflecting on these and redefining them is key to living authentically. Caring for both mind and body is another essential aspect. Nutrition, rest, and physical activity are not just about health. They are expressions of self-worth. Treating yourself with kindness sends a powerful message to your subconscious. You deserve well-being. Seeking silence and introspection is equally important. In a world filled with distractions, tuning into your inner voice can be a challenge. Meditation, journaling, or simply walking in nature can help you reconnect with your true essence. One of Jung's most fascinating ideas is synchronicity, the belief that certain events are not mere coincidences, but reflections of our inner alignment. When someone chooses authenticity, they often notice that the right people come into their life, opportunities arise effortlessly, and answers appear at just the right moment. These meaningful coincidences serve as signs that we are on the right path. In spiritual traditions, this aligns with the idea that when we are true to ourselves, the universe supports us, answering the questions along the journey. If you ever wonder, how do I know if a relationship is good for me? Pay attention to how you feel after interacting with that person. Do they energize you or drain you? The answer lies in your emotions. How can I choose myself without feeling guilty? Remember, prioritizing yourself is not selfish. It ensures you can give your best to others. What if I lose people along the way? You never lose those who truly value your essence. You only release relationships that were never aligned with you. Jung taught us that real transformation does not come from seeking external validation, but from trusting our inner voice. If there's one thing this journey toward authenticity teaches us, it's that every step towards self-love leads to a more fulfilling life. So ask yourself, what small action can you take today to move closer to your truth? Life is too precious to be lived under the weight of others' expectations. Choosing yourself is the greatest act of love, not just for you, but for those around you. Each step you take toward authenticity shapes your world and the world of those around you. Now it's your turn. What decision can you make today to honor your true self? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear how this message resonated with you. If this content inspired you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more reflections to help you connect with yourself. Together, we can build a community where being authentic is the norm, not the exception. See you in the next video.
What if true awakening wasn't about finding the light, but about walking straight through the heart of the darkness? Carl Jung warned us, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Because before you can meet your essence, before you can grasp who you truly are, everything you thought you were must begin to collapse. This video won't offer you comfort. It's not here to soothe your mind or validate your ego. It's an invitation to sit with your shadow, to face the parts of yourself you've been running from, and to stay, no matter how loud the silence becomes. Because only there, in the shattered quiet of the soul, does what is real begin. The spark that ignites a spiritual awakening is not always a quest for answers. It's not about seeking light, peace, or transcendence. Often, it begins as a silent cry from the depths of your being, a call that words cannot name. It's a restlessness that emerges not from the mind, but from somewhere older, deeper, sacred. And it doesn't always come gently. It arrives like an earthquake, shaking the foundations of your identity, pulling apart the seams of everything familiar. Most people don't survive this process, not because it kills the body, but because it dismantles every constructed identity, every narrative, every mask they spent a lifetime perfecting. The personality they so carefully built, the roles they played, the labels they wore, begins to fall apart in the face of something far more powerful and uncontrollable: the truth. And when this happens, many retreat. They numb themselves. They return to the illusion. They go back to sleep. Because the truth, raw, wild, unpolished, does not come to cradle you. It comes to break you. It shatters the illusions you clung to, the stories you depended on, the personas that became second skin. It undoes you. It tears away the safety nets. It strips you of the borrowed beliefs and second-hand dreams you mistook for your own. This is the part no one talks about, the part left out of the sugar-coated stories about enlightenment. It's the scream beneath the silence. It's the psychic death, the soul's trembling when it realizes that the world it knew has stopped making sense. They told you awakening was light, but that's only half of the journey. The other half is born in shadow. When you pass through that hidden threshold, the world begins to dissolve. Not in a literal sense, but in an existential one. The meanings you gave things start to crumble. The version of yourself you once believed in begins to vanish. Your gods, your ambitions, your beliefs, all the structures that held you become hollow echoes in a chamber you no longer know how to live in. That's what Jung meant. There is no awakening without pain. Because awakening doesn't arrive wrapped in peace. It arrives cloaked in crisis. It begins when the life you built starts to feel like a lie. Not a cruel lie, but a necessary one. A scaffolding that once shielded you from truths you weren't yet ready to face. But now you are. Or at least some ancient part of you is. A buried, untamed, sacred part of you that refuses to fall back asleep. You can no longer unsee what you've seen. The dreams you chased now feel like they belong to someone else. The people who once felt like home now seem distant, as if you've drifted to a different frequency. The pleasures that used to excite you now taste like dust. And what remains is silence. A silence so profound, it drowns out the voice you used to call me. This is the death of the ego. And it's not a metaphor. It is a real and harrowing psychological death of identity. And if you resist it, the pain intensifies. If you fight it, it feels like madness. And even if you surrender, it will still tear you open. But within that tearing, you catch a glimpse of the eternal. That's why so many turn back. Because the old self doesn't die quietly. It screams. It bargains. It begs for survival. It tells you that this is just depression, that you're lost, that you're broken. And maybe you are, because the map you were given was never meant to lead you back to yourself. You were taught to fit in, to succeed, to follow the mold. But no one taught you how to be real. No one showed you how to descend. No one prepared you to turn inward and listen to the whisper of the soul beneath the mask. So yes, the descent feels like destruction. But in truth, it's a sacred invitation. It is an initiation into your rebirth. You will be asked to let go of everything that is not real. Every label, every mask, every identity that was never truly yours. You will lose things. You will lose people. You will lose versions of yourself you once thought were eternal. And you will have to let them go. Because if you cling to them, if you try to drag them into the new frequency, they will rot in your hands. Awakening doesn't offer you a better version of your old life. It burns that life to ashes. And then, in the smoke, it waits to see if something, anything, dares to rise from what's been lost. Most people turn back. They choose comfort over truth, applause over authenticity, the familiar cage over the wild unknown. Because the wild, oh the wild, is terrifying. It speaks a language the rational mind can't understand. It asks you to feel, to stay, to hold your gaze steady when the mirror shows you the parts you tried to forget. It reveals your shadow, not as an enemy, but as a part of you, abandoned and aching for home. The part that burned quietly, the part that now calls to you. There are inner encounters that do not obey language. They follow the sacred urgency of the soul to see itself unmasked. The part of you that cried in silence, that learned to manipulate, to fear, to control, just to survive without love. And yet, that same part is where your rebirth begins. Now, It asks to be seen, to be recognized. Awakening does not mean running away from that shadow. On the contrary, it means inviting it to sit beside you. It means looking it straight in the eyes, even when its language is cruel, even when it speaks through discomfort, through silence, through chaos. The shadow doesn't speak softly. It expresses itself through pain, through sabotage, through compulsions, through the destructive instincts that seem to tear apart the very things you hold most sacred. It lives in your jealousy, in your addictions, in your constant need to defend yourself. And as long as you continue to look away, to pretend it's not there, you will remain trapped, looping endlessly in the same patterns, in the same relationships, in the same fears. What most people fail to understand is that awakening is not the end of suffering. It is the conscious beginning of facing it, truly facing it, with raw honesty, with open eyes, with your soul stripped bare. That's why very few ever truly cross the threshold, because awakening doesn't ask for something small. It demands everything. It demands your grief, your fury, your silence. It requires your willingness to be reborn with no guarantees, with no certainty of who you will become on the other side. It asks you to die while still breathing, to lose your mind in order to find your soul, to watch the scaffolding of your identity collapse and still say, yes. And in that yes, everything begins. This descent doesn't require your strength. It requires your surrender. And that's what terrifies the ego most, because the ego was built to control what you feel, what others see, the story you tell yourself. It was forged in a world that punishes vulnerability. But your soul did not come here to merely survive. It came to transform. And every true transformation requires a breaking down. You must shed the armor, unravel the stories, dismantle the structures that once told you who you had to be. Only then can something real emerge, not something born from fear, but something born from essence. And essence doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It waits. It waits patiently, silently, for the noise to settle, for the masks to fall away, for the mind to exhaust itself with its endless spinning. Then, and only then, it whispers, not in words, but through a deep, unmistakable yearning, a longing for something more. Not more success, not more approval, something more real, more honest, more alive. And that longing, don't mistake it for weakness. Don't label it as depression or dysfunction. It is the call. It is the sacred signal that you're ready to leave the lie behind. But here lies the brutal truth. Most people hear that call and pretend nothing's happening. They smother it with achievements. They drown it in distractions. They numb it with routine. Because answering that call means losing the world you built on sand. And no one warns you just how lonely that first step can be. The first stage of awakening is not beauty. It is exile. Exile from the familiar. Exile from your socially accepted self. Exile from the system of validation you didn't even realize you depended on. And in that exile, you will ache to return. You'll miss the numbness, the predictability, the comfort of pretending. But something inside you won't allow it. Because once you've seen the truth, you cannot unsee it. Once you've felt the weight of your soul, you cannot go back to floating on the surface. So you begin to wander, through sleepless nights, through mornings stained with tears you can't explain, through relationships that suddenly feel empty, even if no one did anything wrong. You're not broken. You are in the in-between, the space between what you once were and what has not yet emerged, the cocoon, the void, the liminal zone where the old has died and the new hasn't taken root yet. It's a terrifying place, a sacred one, and it is there that your soul begins its deepest work. There, the shadow steps in closer. It is no longer satisfied with being ignored. It appears in every reaction, in every wound that rises from the depths, like a buried scream, echoing across the years. And only when you face it without judgment, with compassion, with surrender, does the transmutation begin. Not from perfection, but from authenticity. Not from control, but from truth. And yes, you will want to run. Of course you will. You were taught to escape pain, to patch it up, to spiritualize it, to silence it with affirmations and fake positivity. But awakening is not escape. It is confrontation. It is staring directly into the mirror of your own fragmentation and refusing to look away. You're not being asked to avoid pain. You're being asked to feel it, to sit with it, to let it move through you, to let it show you what comfort never could. And slowly, something shifts. You begin to realize that pain was never the enemy. It was the doorway, the crack in the armor, the fracture through which light could finally pour in. You begin to understand that anger, sadness, fear, they were never broken parts. They were hidden messengers, each carrying a piece of your truth. And as you listen to them, something softens inside you, something ancient. You start to feel what you maybe haven't felt in years, or perhaps ever. Compassion, not just for others, but for yourself, for the child you once were, who was never held the way they needed, for the teenager who built armor just to survive, for the adult who mistook productivity for purpose. Now, you see all of it, without judgment, with tenderness, with awe, with a kind of grace that can only rise from the ashes of self-abandonment. And in that grace, everything begins to shift. You no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need to be perfect. You no longer need to heal in order to be worthy, because you finally remember who you are beneath it all. And that memory changes everything. You begin to understand that awakening was never a race toward a better version of yourself, but a return to honesty. Honesty with the chaos, with the beauty, with the paradox of being human, divine, and afraid, eternal and fractured, limitless and wounded. And somehow that honesty becomes the ground where you can finally stand, not from safety, not from certainty, but from truth. You no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. You no longer need to fit into places that dim your light. You no longer need to sacrifice your truth just to feel safe, because now you know that you are that safe place. Not because you've figured everything out, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself in the very corners where it hurt the most. You've stopped running, and that changes everything. That's what very few people achieve, not because they're weak, but because no one taught them how to stay with discomfort, to stay with the unknown, to stay with their soul long enough to hear it. But you are staying. And because you stay, you are becoming real. Not polished, not perfect, but grounded, aligned, deeply alive. And that is the beginning of the unbreakable. You begin to realize how much of your life was built on borrowed dreams. Dreams you never chose, chosen for you by culture, by fear, by generations that never knew what wholeness looked like. They only knew what survival demanded. And survival demands that you shrink, wear a mask, trade your soul for approval, bury your needs, your truth, your hunger behind a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. But you're no longer surviving. You're awakening. And with that awakening comes a sacred rage, a deep, thunderous, holy fury against the lie, against the roles you played, against the ways you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. And that rage is not a regression, it's a resurrection. It's the part of you that remembers, I was never born to live asleep. You begin to speak differently, not louder, but with more clarity. You say no without guilt. You say yes without needing to explain. You stop apologizing for being whole. And the world doesn't know what to do with this version of you. It trained you to fit in, to obey, to dilute yourself into the acceptable. But now, you are a frequency it cannot predict, a truth it cannot distort, a presence that wakes up the unconscious in others just by existing. This is the power of embodiment. It's not about talking about awakening or posting about healing. It's about becoming it, breathing it, letting it move through every moment without resistance. And no, it's not glamorous, it's not always poetic. Sometimes it looks like crying alone in your car while your nervous system rewrites itself. Sometimes it looks like losing people you thought would be forever because your truth became too loud for their silence. Other times, it looks like saying goodbye to a life built with love, but from an identity you no longer are. This is the cost of becoming. You don't just lose illusions, you lose identities. You lose what held you up, even if now it holds you back. And what comes in its place isn't immediate or clear or clean. It's a void, a sacred space where the old no longer fits and the new has not yet been born. You wake up and don't know who you are. You walk through the world, feeling both ancient and newly born. You try to put it into words, but language falls short. You try to plan, but the future laughs. Because this space is not for building, it's for listening. Listening to that whisper beneath the noise. That whisper that says, let go. Let go of the plan. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the need to understand it all. Let this shape you, strip you down, show you what remains when there is nothing left to protect. And what remains is real. It is not your character, not your performance, not the polished image you guarded like armor. What remains is breath, presence, that deep pulse of being alive without having to prove it. And in that space, you meet not the self you hope to become, but the one who's always been waiting. The wild one, the wounded one, the one who remembers why you came before the world taught you to forget. You no longer need to chase your purpose. You embody it in every step, in every word, in every choice that leans into softness when everything around you calls for hardness. You no longer seek meaning, like it's a staircase. You live it as a way of walking, of loving, of not abandoning your soul when everything goes dark. This is the deepest phase of awakening, the one no one prepares you for. Not because it's secret, but because it can't be taught. It can only be lived. It's not a destination or a peak. It's a rhythm, a return, a remembering. The self behind the shadow, the self before the mold, the self beyond the story. And when you begin to live from that place, not just visit it, but truly inhabit it, everything changes, not instantly or dramatically, but in a way that is undeniable. Life becomes quieter, yet more fulfilling. You stop explaining yourself to those who never really listened. You stop handing your intuition over to experts or systems. You stop betraying your inner knowing just to be liked. And then something unexpected happens. You no longer chase love because you realize you are that love. You always were. It's not in the mirror, not in someone else's eyes, not waiting in a future moment. It's here, now, inside. And you begin to trust that a life aligned with your truth will unfold in time, that whatever falls away was never yours, and whatever remains will find you in this new frequency. You no longer rush your process, no longer beg for clarity, no longer fear the unknown. Now, the unknown feels like home, not because it's become predictable, but because within its mystery lives a different kind of strength, one that rises from soul collapse and having made it through. It's not a strength that screams or seeks validation. It doesn't shine the way the world taught you to measure worth. It is quiet, sovereign. It's the strength of someone who has remembered who they are without needing to be seen. Because when you die to everything that wasn't real, what remains is unbreakable. Not because it can't break, but because it already has, and returned with a deeper truth. You no longer walk through life looking for proof that you matter. You walk as proof, not for others, but for your soul, for that private part of you that remembers how much it cost to reclaim your voice, to learn to walk alone, to burn the lie just to feel real again. This kind of strength isn't built overnight. It's forged in fire, in the trembling before the truth, in those nights when you thought you wouldn't make it. And now, survival is no longer the goal. Now, there is only truth. Your life feels simpler now, not because it's easier, but because you no longer spend energy trying to be someone you're not. You no longer form bonds from fear of being alone. You no longer sell your time for approval. You no longer dilute your depth to be accepted. You've come to know yourself too well to pretend again. And what once seemed like a curse, exile, disappointment, silence, now feels like grace, because it led you here, to this stillness, this truth, this inner sanctuary that no one outside of you can give or take away. Now you watch others run after possessions, chase meaning like shadows, and you don't judge them, because you were there too. You still carry the scar, but now you carry the light as well. Not a blinding light, but one that calls, one that says, you can stop running now, you can feel, you can return to yourself, and some will. They will see in you what they've been dying to remember in themselves, and others won't, and that's okay, because you no longer need to awaken anyone. You only need to stay awake, stay rooted, stay open, stay real. This is the silent revolution, not to fight the system, but to stop feeding it with your energy. Not to preach about change, but to embody what can no longer be denied. Your presence alone becomes a mirror, not one that flatters, but one that reveals. Some will shatter in front of it, others will awaken, but their reaction is not your job to manage. Your job is to keep being the mirror, to keep being the clarity, to keep being the fire. This is how spiritual awakening becomes power. Not through performance, but through presence. You become something that cannot be moved, because you no longer live from the surface, but from the source. From that self that was never lost, only asleep, pushed into the corners of your soul by fear, by habit, by pain. And now you remember. You remember how to rest without guilt, how to feel without carrying someone else's shame, how to speak without shrinking, without asking for permission to exist. You remember how to walk through the world without explaining yourself, because your existence is no longer a question, it's an answer. You no longer ask, who am I supposed to be? Now you whisper with certainty, I already am. And that is the final threshold. This journey has never been about becoming more. It's about becoming you. Entirely, wholly, unapologetically you. The sacred and the chaotic, the divine spark and the shattered pieces, the healed scars and the open wounds, the parts still bleeding and the fragile sprouts just beginning to bloom. It's all part of you. And finally, everything is allowed. Nothing is exiled. Nothing is denied. You're no longer trying to escape your humanness. You're not running away from your experience. You're here to inhabit it, fully, with eyes wide open, with your heart bare, your spirit vulnerable, and your soul brave. That's why you survived the spiritual awakening. Not because you mastered it. Not because you rose above it like some untouchable mystic. You survived because you stayed. You didn't transcend to escape the pain. You remained in it. You allowed the fire to burn through you, not once, but again and again. You stood your ground as the awakening broke you, emptied you, stripped you of illusions, identities, masks, and beliefs, and in the ruins of who you once thought you were, something real was born. You didn't become a better version of yourself. You became an authentic one, and that is a far greater transformation. Now you carry something with you, something impossible to describe in words, a frequency, an ancient knowing, a light that doesn't shine to be seen, but simply is. This isn't a performance, it's presence, pure presence, and you walk the world now without seeking the next peak experience, the next cosmic answer, or the next stage of awakening. Because you live as one who has already awakened. This is the space very few ever reach, not because they are incapable, but because they turn back too soon. They get close, they feel the fire, and then retreat. But you didn't. You didn't run. You turned inward. You walked into your own depths. You faced the shadows, the ghosts, the echoes, and the silences. And in that journey inward, you found something unexpected. You found home, inside yourself. So now, you don't walk through life chasing something. You walk to radiate. You don't move to prove anything to anyone. You move because you are. You are being. And in your presence, others feel something different. Not through your words, not through your actions, but simply by being near you. They feel that indescribable essence that only emanates from someone who has touched the fire and, against all odds, chose to stay. And that choice, that sacred choice, changes everything. If this message resonated with you, don't leave like nothing happened. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and dive into the other videos. We're not here for surface-level change. We're here for real transformation. This space is not for everyone. It's for those who are ready to leave behind the programmed, the passive, the conditioned version of themselves, and step fully into their awakening. So if you're still here, if you feel that shift within you, don't just watch. Commit to the journey. We're just getting started.